While commending Sri Lanka's reforms progress, the International Monetary Fund reiterated the need to preserve the hard-earned gains the country had achieved since the beginning of the IMF program. The IMF called Sri Lanka to continue its strong ownership of the progress. The sentiments were expressed by Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Kenichi Okamura, during a meeting with the Sri Lanka delegation currently in Washington, D.C. to participate in the IMF World Bank Spring meetings. In response, the Sri Lankan delegation assured commitment to ensuring continuity and consistency of macroeconomic policies and reforms undertaken by the IMF as part of the program. In another discussion with the IMF Executive Director for Sri Lanka, Professor Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, the Sri Lankan delegation discussed the next steps towards finalizing the second review of the IMF program following staff-level agreement.
A Sri Lankan delegation headed by State Minister of Finance Shehan Semasinghe is currently in Washington, D.C. to participate in the spring meetings organized by the World Bank Group and the International Monetary Fund. On the sidelines of the spring meetings, the Sri Lankan delegation held a meeting with the Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, Kenichi Okamura. During the discussion, Okamura, who commended the Sri Lankan authorities on strong program implementation and reform progress, emphasized the need to preserve the hard-earned gains Sri Lanka has made since the beginning of the IMF program and continue strong ownership. The Sri Lankan delegation, which included Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe and Treasury Secretary Mahinda Siriwardana, also affirmed the commitment of the Sri Lankan authorities to ensuring the continuity and consistency of macroeconomic policies and reforms undertaken as a part of the program. Meanwhile, the Sri Lankan delegation also met with IMF Executive Director for Sri Lanka, Professor Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, and discussed the progress of debt restructuring as well as the next step towards the finalization of the second review of the IMF program following the staff-level agreement. In the meantime, discussions between the Sri Lankan delegation and the Executive Director of the World Bank for Sri Lanka, Parameswaran Iyer, focused on the updates on the various internal restructurings within the World Bank and how those changes could benefit countries like Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, the Sri Lankan delegation in the US held talks with the Business Council for International Understanding on the development of the Sri Lankan economy and its investment prospects. State Minister of Finance Shehan Semasinghe stated that the discussion centered around the potential that Sri Lanka offers for international investors and explored various sectors, including education, tourism, renewable energy, agriculture and technology, where strategic investments can drive sustainable economic growth and development. The State Minister added that the recent macroeconomic landscape of Sri Lanka and recent reforms that have transformed into results were also reviewed during the meeting.